Hi, I'm Jane Ryan. I work for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture as a drawing and painting tutor, and I'm going to be presenting a few lessons on watercolour techniques. Today's lesson is going to be about drawing pebbles with watercolour. So the materials that you'll need would be the same watercolour set as we used for the ink watercolours, just pans, but you can use tubes if you want to. Pencil, a candle broken so that you can use it inside of the wax, an eraser, and 3 brushes, all round brushes, a number 10, a number 6, a number 5, but don't worry if you don't have these exact numbers, and 2 waters. So we're going to be drawing stones today. This is a stone that's picked up somewhere near Loch Lomond. As you can see, it's a couple of colours with some, I think, iron oxide maybe running through it. So I want to just look at a few techniques in watercolour paint that might help you to try and get this lovely textural feeling quite easily. So I've got 2 stones here. The first one, which is the one that I drew the last set of watercolours from, I'm actually going to change it because this is quite an interesting stone here, but it's a lot more details to it, so I thought it'd be quite interesting to see how you capture the 2 different tones from one end to the other. The first thing you want to do is draw the stone, and again, I don't want you to sit down and anatomically depict it. We're not doing this for a geology manual, so it's organic. Just take your time, give some nice flowing lines to the shapes. So I'll just do a drawing here, and just to get a kind of idea, and again, I'm doing this quite heavily so you can see a kind of general idea of how I'm drawing it. I'm looking at the shapes. Occasionally I'm not even looking at the paper when I'm doing it. I'm just trying to find shapes within the stone that will define the different colours and the different values for the painting. And don't keep asking yourself, does this look like a stone? Because I can guarantee that it's not going to look like a stone until you're finished. Okay. A good idea is to look at the outside of the shape. And just drawing the bigger areas first as you go along. If you make an error, it's a stone. Nobody's going to notice your error. So this part here is more or less the darker top of the rock. And I'm now going to go down here. And I'm going to put in this large kind of stripe across the top. You'll be doing this a wee bit lighter because although it's nice to have pencil work coming through watercolour, you don't want it to be too strong. Now you can see that these white lines are kind of parallel to this main one, so keep an eye on that because that's going to be a guide to you. Go back up here. And again, don't go, oh, I've drawn that too far over here, or I've drawn this too far over there. That's not where it goes. It's not about the technical accuracy. That's a completely different skill and a completely different lesson. But what you are trying to find is you're trying to find areas, especially the lighter white areas for the next stage. I'll Okay, so I'm going to stop round about here. You could do a little bit more detail. I would recommend not doing too much more detail at this point. So the next thing you want to do is get a candle, just a normal candle. You get the supermarket and just break it in two. And we're going to use the wax in the inside. It's quite handy to have it at a point. This is a little bit blunt perhaps, but I'm going to try and use the very top of it. And what I'm going to do is where there is white areas, I'm going to work the candle into there. Now it's almost like I'm colouring in, but you don't want to cover every single bit of white, because if you do, that prevents some colours, in particular ones that we might use called a wash, from getting into the paper. So instead of kind of being very smooth with this, actually I would encourage you to be quite erratic with the marks that you're putting down, and you won't see it, so it's a lovely surprise when you go to work with it. It's the way you put it, but that's part of the fun. So I'm just going up here. I'm going to try and find a line up here somewhere, and across here, and here. And the ones I've drawn out quite heavily I can fill in, but there's also a few little ones that just kind of come across in their own, and I'm just going to do some just little lines like that. And this is a stage that you can be at, that you can be prepared for starting to paint. If you have any lines in there that you want to get rid of, you can take them out. When you are rubbing out with a pencil, with an eraser, I recommend actually dabbing it as opposed to really going in like that all the time. If you dab it, you can actually put in pencil mark and lift it ever so gently so that you still see the lines, but they're not terribly obvious. The first thing to do is just have a quick look at the different tones of colour, different variety of hues that are in the stone. I'm going to break this one up into two. So I've got the darker area here with the white and a lighter area here. This is more of a maybe sort of bluey grey colour, and at the back here is a slightly more greeny grey colour. So to mix the first colour at the front here, I'm going to use ultramarine blue to start with. And I'm going to mix the colour in quite a strong way. And what I'm going to do is to take the bluiness out of it, is I'm going to put, this is Payne's Grey, which is a black, it's a kind of black, but it's not as strong as a pure black. Now Payne's Grey itself is made up of ultramarine blue and Mars black, and sometimes a little bit of crimson, and it was made just as an alternative to kind of normal black colour. So we're actually adding a bit of ultramarine to something that's got ultramarine in it, but it just takes the bluiness away. A good idea whenever you're painting is maybe at one side of your paper or on a separate bit of paper is just to have a little experimental area, which means that you can test if the colour you're putting down is strong enough. And I'm going to go first, put a little bit more Payne's Grey in there, just to take it down a little bit. And what I'm doing is I am mixing the kind of purest colour with the pigment that I can, and then because we're doing the first layer, I don't want it to be too strong. So then I go into the side of the mix with some water, like that, and you can see that the colour comes down. And then I'm going to start working into the paper. So where the white is, I should have the wax area here, which is making a resist, which means that even if I go over the top of the wax, the blue won't go into it. Now it's still quite blue. I'm going to add a little bit more of the Payne's Grey. And you might say, why am I not using Payne's Grey all on its own? I just feel that black can deaden quite a lot. I mean, it's got some fantastic uses, but it can sometimes deaden the paint work, the paint, if you're doing it a lot. So I try and add another colour to it mostly. So as you can see, I'm just going to go around from shapes. I am not sticking religiously to the lines, but I'm just trying to follow the guidelines that I've got. And when you're coming around the edge, it's quite handy just to take your time a little bit more and make sure you get a nice clean edge. Yeah. As you can see too, I'm covering some of the paper but not all of the paper, because I want some of that white to stay bare so that I can go over it with a wash later on. Alright, here we go. Put a few little dots in, not too many. And that's probably pretty much it for the top end. Make sure I've got enough water. I'm just going to skip over here a little bit and put in a little bit of blue in that bit here. And then I'm quickly going to go on to the green. So for the green, the greeny grey, I'm going to use ultramarine again. And a little bit of yellow ochre, which is an earth colour. So it's used quite often, you know, it's a really good colour for use when you're doing sort of natural objects. Again, still, I want to have this greeny grey look, but I do also want to bring it down a little bit with. I'll test it, and you can see there that the colour is quite different, even though they've both got an ultramarine base. So we'll get lots of water into there, and you can really go to town with this, because remember that you've put wax onto the paper, so you can afford to go in quite loosely and into areas like that, and you can see that the paper where the wax isn't accepting the paint. You can use a bigger brush for this if you want. Although you are kind of going, you're using quite interesting brush marks to do this, it's really quite a good idea to be doing it in this direction, because the kind of stratas of the layers of the rocks are in this direction, and the brush strokes should enhance it. And it will enhance it if you make sure it's going in the same direction. There we go. And you can see, even though that I'm leaving some of the white areas, just make sure you leave a few little dots as well for that are a bit free of paint. In here, although this is sort of white rock, there's a kind of darker shade to it, so I have got some wax on here, but I'm just going to show you what happens when I drag colour over the wax, and you can see that actually some of the paint's damp, it lies on top of the wax, and if you leave it to dry, it will dry in these lovely little dots, which is something that we want to happen, because it gives us lots of texture. As you can see up here, they've got lots of little kind of dimples that's going to help with. And I'm going to go in. A bit blue. Just a little bit like that, and maybe a little bit up the top. Okay. So you continue on with this until you've got the whole first layer on this very kind of light, very watery shades of the colours that you're going to be using, and then you leave it alone, and you must leave it to completely dry. And the way you test it is completely dry is if you put your hand on it. If it's still quite cold, then it's still a bit damp, so just leave it until it's a nice sort of neutral temperature. Now, I've left this to completely dry, but I've actually gone back in and put a little bit of wet paint in it, because I want to show you what happens if you don't leave it to dry, and you can decide whether or not that effect is what you can use within the drawing. But initially what I'm going to do is I want this colour here. I want to put the first layer. I want this colour to be here. We don't layer up colours in order to cover it up with another colour. We layer up colours because we want to have dimensions to the colour on the painting. So obviously here it's really quite dark. So I am going to lean more towards the Payne's Grey. I'll bring this a little bit closer. But I'm going to go in with, again, with the ultramarine. Now you can see that's really quite dark, but I want it to be darker than the one that I've put down. And I'm not going to be putting as much water in this one either. So take the stone, and then you just start to have some fun. If you're not having fun, if you're analysing it too much, not any good. You just have to have a good time. So in here I can see this is quite a lot darker, and there are shapes within this big area as well. So I'm just going to play about and put in some kind of different shapes, but I'm leaving some blue, the kind of initial layer. I'm going to leave that there. Now the interesting thing is that if you go in quite dark like this with watercolour, we can do a method called lifting out. If we don't like it, we can reactivate it and take it back out at a later date. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But you can see immediately you start adding a darker value of paint, using more pigment in the brush, then all of a sudden you start to get a bit of dimension to your picture. So and you'd work your way round, and you can see you're getting these lovely areas where you've got light, you get the light blue against the very dark blue. So I'm going to work quite quickly here. And I'm going to put a little bit in just down here for the set area. And I'm going to just take the brush gently over some of the areas that have wax in it, just to check how far the wax goes. And although I can drag the watercolour over the wax and get this lovely texture here, but be careful with it, because it can, if you're not careful, it can start to look a bit messy. So I'm just going to drag a few bits over here. And again, one. Now, as I was saying, if you leave it wet, if you leave some of the areas of your paint wet, like this, and then you were to go back in with a bit of grey and like that, what will happen is you're going to get the two running into each other to blend them, and that's fine, that's absolutely fine, but it's much more difficult to control. So that's why it's a good idea to make sure that the paint underneath is completely dry, and then you know you're in control of it. Right, so we're just going to go back onto this colour, which again was ultramarine blue, and this time I'm going to put in the yellow ochre. Again, it's going to be a little bit heavier on the paint. I quite like the yellow, yeah, a bit more yellow in it, and a little bit of paint's great. I'm going to mix that in. Let's try it next to it. Taking that down quite a lot, put quite a lot of Payne's grey in, a little bit darker there. Right, okay, so it's better. Same again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go in and pick out nice shapes, going quite close up to the waxed bits, and maybe make them a little bit darker closer by to where the white stripes are. Now you can see here that I've just gone over a piece of white paper that hasn't had any wax on it, and you can see automatically just gives you another shade of this green that we're using. So there you go, and just sort of splash in there, and let some of these lovely pools of water just settle on their own as well. Around here. Don't worry if you add a little bit too much blue in one bit and not enough in another. That's what we call a shadow, so that'll be good. You can create shadows without even thinking about it. And here. If you want to dry it quite quickly, it's quite a good idea you can use a hairdryer. Sometimes the paper might start to curl, but it should flatten out. And here I'm using a wee bit of wet and wet to distribute that colour a little bit further. And in here, I'm going to go over here to see if there's any areas, and I think I'll wax on them. Alright, so here we have, we've got the two colours in. So if you keep working into the shapes and creating even stronger pigment colours, just using less water, so that you can build up little areas that are quite significantly darker, like this area here, and then keeping ones up here a little bit lighter. Now, what I want to do is show you how to do what we call lifting out. Now, lifting out is where you can return to a watercolour picture, and say for instance you want to keep this bit lighter. Keep a damp, clean brush and go in and sweep over the paint, and just take kind of one sweep and take the excess paint off. What you don't want to do is sweep that off and then go back in, because all you're going to do is lay down the colour that's on the brush. So this is called lifting out, and it's very, very handy if you feel that you've applied too much paint, or that you want to add a highlight into your work. So there's a lot of detail in this stone, and you could really spend quite a long time doing it. But I'm trying to just show you the basics with it just now. So lifting out, let me just do one more bit here for you here. So maybe down here, I would like to just lift out a bit of colour. Just pull that brush up and make sure that you're always just leaving it on a bit of kitchen towel there. So that's lifting out. Across the top here, there's kind of faint little bits of sort of orange, and I think it's the iron oxide that's in the stone. So if you mix yellow ochre with a little bit of kind of orangey red, because the yellow ochre is an earth tone, it's not as bright as a yellow. You can take that down and maybe give a colour that comes out a wee bit like that. And you can just pick out maybe these little areas. You can hardly see it at all, but it actually works quite well against the colour of the stone, because reds and greens or oranges and greens sort of complement each other. They're opposite ends of the colour wheel, so they really kind of brighten things up a wee bit when they're put together. Now, where I have got wax, you'll notice that what I can do is, like I said a wee bit earlier, I can place colour onto the wax and leave it, and as long as I leave it and don't touch it, it will actually dry on top of it. So just put it a bit like that. And where you want to get more of a contrast, if you don't feel that these lines are standing out enough, then the best thing to do is to go back in and just define them with a darker colour. Now, if you've got darker colours working at the other end of your picture, so you want to maybe define this corner, what you can do is you can just lift a little bit of paint from there and lighten it, and you could then reapply it on just down here. And the more contrast you get between this colour and that light vein, then the more it'll stand out. What you see with this is that I've actually, in order to kind of show you how the wax works, I've made these quite thick. If you were doing this, you would just make sure that you look to see that these are actually quite fine lines, so they could probably bear to be a little bit finer. And also you see where you've got some cracks coming up the rock. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.